if you go to Facebook, to my channel, you can now watch. If you didn't see it when I first did it, you can watch the talk. Does God love you?
Ask him if you're not a member.
You may find a surprisingly optimistic answer, but I won't tell you what it is. Okay. All right. Let's get going, everyone. Let me just confirm that we are. Yeah. Okay. There's something exciting about saying we are live, but we're live on Facebook and YouTube, and now we can. Let me put it. Okay. All right, everyone. So good evening. Good evening. Yeah. So the protest God embraced. Did you know that God embraces protests? He truly does, and we have biblical evidence of it from this week's Torah portion, which is the reason why the Alter Rebbe teaches us that Mindaf Leben mit Tzait, you have to live with the weekly Torah portion, because if you study the weekly Torah portion, you will find guidance for what is going on in the world at that particular time. But before I even go there, I'd like to share this with you. There, unfortunately, many rabbis. So I just want you to know I just want you to know that I'm not biased. I'm an equal opportunity offender, and so tonight I'm going to speak about some rabbis. So there are some rabbis who feel that when something some form of tragedy happens to the world, or in more particularly to the Jewish people, that their job is to let the Jewish people know why it's happening, which of course assumes that they know why it's happening, right? Which is already quite problematic, because the last I've checked from all I know quite a number of rabbis. Just so happens, some of them are very profound, actually, rabbis, and some of them are truly exceptional. And not one of them, from all the rabbis I know, has God ever showed up to tell them why something is happening. So we have general guidance from the Torah, but to say specifically A is happening because of B takes somewhat of a conceited personality. And so some rabbis have decided to tell their congregations or communities that the reason why the virus has hit the Jewish community in the sense that, or hit the world in the sense that it affected the Jewish community in a way that we cannot go to services and we cannot daven as we were able to until the virus hit, is because we do not respect our shuls, our synagogues, properly enough, and we talk and we do this and we do that, whatever it is. And surely we can use improvement in those areas as we can in many other areas. And surely that is not the reason why the virus is hit. So what's fascinating is that amongst in the Chabad rabbi world, there was a Hasidic discourse that was circulating from the Rebbe in 1964. On Shabbos in 1964, I think it was Parshas Yisro, if I remember correctly, the Rebbe said in his Farbrengen, where he would give many talks, he would often also dedicate one talk to being a Hasidic discourse, which is a deeper form of a talk in a special tune. And he discussed over there a number of ideas, but one of the main ideas that he was discussing was that when God exiled the Jewish people after the destruction of the first temple and then the second temple, which is exile we're in now, we're exiled from the second temple, most of the commandments in the Torah were no longer applicable, but because most commandments in the Torah are relevant when we're living in the land of Israel, when we have certain structures in place, such as the Shemitah, the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year, and the Jubilee year, the 50th year, and we have a temple. But once you remove that from the picture, most of the commandments in the Torah are not applicable. In fact, we're left with, out of 248 positive commandments, I'm going to take away all of your excuses now, because you say, oh my God, 613 commandments. Who can handle 613 commandments? But guess what? there are only out of 248 positive commandments. A positive commandment means a commandment where God asks us or commands us to do something. So we refer to that as a positive commandment. A negative commandment is a commandment where God says, don't do. We refer to that as a negative, meaning a do not. So the positive, the do's, like the honeydews, right? The positive commandments, out of 248, there are only 87 that are relevant. So I'm sorry, but you're going to have to revise your case. But there are 87 positive commandments. And what happens is, as the Rebbe discussed in this discourse, quoting from the Zohar and other sources, not very substantial sources to this, that what happens is there is judgment in heaven or on high, as you will, against the Jewish people, because there are always the opposing angels, if you will, or if you will, Satan, which are really, their job is to prosecute the Jews and to argue against us so that we shouldn't have more blessing, but we should have more suffering. And their argument is that, look, the Jews have 87 mitzvahs now, positive mitzvahs, and even those they just do, as we say in Hebrew, mitzvahs anashim u'lamadan. We just do it. They just do it out of habit, ritually, but they're not engaged in it. So they argue, take more mitzvahs away from the Jewish people. And God says, you know what? I'm going to set up circumstances. Usually it's different than a virus, which God does directly, but usually in our history, it's been other nations, controlling nations, who we're subjugated to, who prohibit us from doing certain things and control us from being able to do certain things. Russia would be a very easy example and a recent example. So why does Hashem decree or set up a scenario where we are now prevented from doing mitzvahs, such as now going to shul? Of course, we can still daven, but we can't say many of the prayers. We can't say a Kaddish, we can't say a Baruch Hu, we can't read from the Torah, all of which bring tremendous holiness into the world. So the reason why is because God says, when someone has a desire, we call it a ratzon, a desire to do something, and you take away, I should say this, when someone has a pleasure in doing something, they enjoy something, and you take it away from them, the desire that's awakened within the person to experience that pleasurable thing is very strong. Now, if it's something that's deeply pleasurable, then the desire is even stronger. It's even stronger. So what God does is God says to the prosecuting angels, so to speak, okay, no problem. We're going to remove some more commandments from the Jewish people. And we're going to see how the Jewish people respond. And what do we discover? That the Jewish people, they're out of shul for a few weeks, and you think, listen, from my vantage point, from my vantage point, sometimes you can once in a while, about once or twice a year, from the 52 Shabbosos in the year, you can get an impression that some people are yawning their way through davening. And I don't blame them. I get it, right? So once in a while you can see that, right? But you take away the shul from people for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, when can we get back? When can we get back? When can we get back? Suddenly, it is revealed to the prosecution that not only are the Jews not just doing their mitzvahs out of habit, but they have a deep desire to get back, demonstrating the deep pleasure that they have in serving Hashem, in coming to shul and davening. And God is waiting for the Jewish people to protest and say, God, you took us out of shul. We want our shul back. What's going on? When are we going to be able to go back to shul? And then there are these requirements and limitations, and people arguing, why do we need to have these limitations? Should we have these limitations? And all of this is all what Hashem wants to see. Because what Hashem really wants to see is that an individual not only does what they are supposed to do, or what they're required to do, but that the person actually, on his own initiative, wants to do it. As we say in English, that we own up to it ourselves. It's not because we're commanded to do it. It's not only because we're commanded to do it, it's because we have a deep yearning and deep desire to do it. And sometimes God takes things away from us simply for us to be able to protest. And what are we protesting? We're not protesting, God, give me this, God, give me that. I don't have enough of this, I don't have enough of that. That's not what the protest is. The protest is for us to be able to fulfill the responsibilities that God has given us. You would think people would say responsibilities, thank God I'm reprieved from them now. I don't have to do them now. Okay, I have a break. Thank you, God, for giving me a break. But no, we say, no, we want those responsibilities. That's the unbelievable thing. Imagine if all the Jewish people said, oh, God, no synagogue. Okay, no synagogue. That's not what's happened. And this is a story in this week's Torah portion. In this week's Torah portion, we have the story of Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach. What happened? The Jews come out of Egypt. The Jews, so firstly, the first month of the year, when we count months, not years, but when we count months in the 12 months, if you're counting in order, we always start from the month of Nisan. That's the month that the Jews came out of Egypt. When we count years, we count from Rosh Hashanah. When we count months, it's maybe a little bit confusing, but months, we start 6 months away from Rosh Hashanah, which is the month of Pesach. That's how you start counting months in order. That's the month of Nisan. So the Jews, on the 15th of the month of Nisan, were told by God, 4 days before that, they were told by God, take a lamb, put it attached to your bedpost. You're going to slaughter it in 4 nights. And on that night, you're going to be led out of Egypt. And Pharaoh came running that night after they slaughtered and roasted the sheep, the goats, and the desert. And some of you may remember of the Karban Pesach was when they would go into the land of Israel. That's when God, so when they did one in Egypt, and the next one would be when they go into the land of Israel. The idea obviously was that they were supposed to go straight to Israel, receive the Torah, go to Israel. We had a little detour because of the spies that went into the land and came back with a bad report. So God said, you're going to wait here for 40 years. But the Jews are there on their first anniversary of the Paschal Lamb. They're not supposed to bring a Karban Pesach. Suddenly God comes to Moshe and says, a special commandment. I'm commanding you this year to bring the Paschal Lamb. Great. Everyone's going to bring the Paschal Lamb. There's one little problem. There was a small minority of Jews who were engaged in the most common explanation is that they were the ones who carried the bones of Joseph, who would end up being buried in Israel. And therefore, because when you, as you may remember, when you touch or carry a corpse, a dead body, you contract spiritual impurity. And when you're spiritually impure, you cannot bring a holy sacrifice. So they couldn't bring the sacrifice. They were very upset. And they said, God, it's not fair. What did they do? They protested. What did they protest? They protested, God, it's not fair that that they're getting something and we're not. No. They protested that they have a mitzvah, a duty that they can do. We want to have that duty. It's an unbelievable. It's really so beautiful. It's beautiful that people are so dedicated and so committed to a cause that they will protest a responsibility. They will protest a duty. We see these two examples that I just gave are both where they are protesting a duty. And here's another interesting thing. They protested in the month of Nisan, the first month, an annual anniversary of their exodus from Egypt. What chapter do we read the story of their protest in? It's chapter 9 in the book of Bamidbar, chapter 9 in the book of Numbers. If you go to the beginning of the book of Numbers, of Bamidbar, you'll see right in the beginning, the second verse, it says that it was on the second month of the second year that God wanted the Jewish people counted. So the book of Bamidbar begins with an event that happened in the second month, and at chapter 10, it jumps back to something that happened in the first month, which is unusual. It's out of order. Now, that's not so disturbing. If you're a scholar of Torah, you know that there's a concept which Rashi quotes in this story as well. but he quotes it numerous times, I think 5 times before this. Ein muktam u'mochav Torah. In the Torah, there is no chronological order. The Torah will go out of historical order, because the Torah is not here to give us history, to teach us history, even though a lot of it is history, but it's not there for history. It's there to teach us lessons. And so therefore, it will put one story that happened later before another story that happened earlier for a certain reason. So Rashi says, why in fact did the Torah go out of order here? Rashi says, because the Torah did not want to begin with a shameful story about the Jews. What's a shameful story about the Jews? So Rashi is saying that the story of the Jews protesting, this story of Pesach Sheni, of them protesting, we also want to be able to bring a Pesach. Just because we were doing a mitzvah and carrying Joseph out of Egypt, we shouldn't be able to bring, right? That's such a beautiful thing. Rashi calls it a shameful story. And because it's a shameful story, we didn't want to begin a new book of one of the 5 books with a shameful story. So we pushed it to we mixed it into the middle of the book by chapter 10 or chapter 9. Why is it a shameful story? Here's the reason why it's a shameful story. Not because they protested. That was beautiful. You know why it's a shameful story? Because they didn't protest enough. What do you mean they didn't protest enough? A small group were not able to bring. God comes and he says, special commandment while you guys are in the desert. This year, only the first year, the only year that they brought a Paschal lamb in the desert was the first year, was that year. The rest of the 39 years, they didn't bring one until they got into Israel, as the Torah commands. There was a small group that was not able to join in this singular commandment on the first year in the desert, and they complained. What's shameful was that the Jewish people did not complain the next year. Say, God, why are we all being left out? Why last year did you command us to bring one, but this year you don't give us the mitzvah to bring one? That's a shameful stain on the Jewish people. That we didn't protest. We didn't protest to have the opportunity to fulfill a duty. Now, this is an unbelievable thing. This is really a very, very profound lesson for all of us, because it's teaching us something which is most impactful on any human life. And that is that I find this every time I do a Zoom, by the way, or any time I teach a class. So sometimes leading up to a class, I'm really not in the mood. That can happen. I confess, right? That can happen. But I'll tell you what happens almost every single time. I mean, it's probably 98% of the time. That once I start teaching, I feel uplifted from the teaching. This is the concept of what the Talmud tells us about, that the more than the calf wants to be nursed by the cow wants to nurse the calf. So the Talmud uses this in different scenarios. The Talmud says more than the rich man does for the poor man when he gives tzedakah, it is the poor man doing for the rich man. The feeling of goodness that I have the ability to be a benefactor for someone else is tremendous. It gives us purpose, it gives us meaning, it gives us significance. It's a tremendous thing. When you teach a class as well, more than the student gains from the class, the teacher gains from the class. Requires a little bit of humility to acknowledge that. I'm acknowledging it verbally. Hopefully I'm acknowledging it more deeply as well. But that's actually the truth. I get very uplifted after I teach a class. So when we realize, and we have, the idea is this, and this is what has taken me a long time to be able to do. To be able to know in the moment that I'm not excited. Don't worry, because in a few minutes you'll be teaching the class and you're going to be very excited. You'll be so happy that you went through this effort where you were dragging your feet to prepare for the class and it was hard for you. It's going to be worthwhile 100 times over. So after a while, you hopefully mature and your mind can set you right, even though your heart's in the wrong place at that time. Your mind says, just hold out, this is going to pay off big time. So when we take on responsibility in life, and in particular the responsibilities that God has endowed us with, that is the greatest blessing. That is the greatest blessing. And that is why when the Jews were in the desert, we know that the Jews complained an awful lot. It actually wasn't as often as it seems. It's just that the Torah lists all of the complaining, so it seems like they complained every day. But in actuality, it wasn't every day. But anyway, they complained a whole bunch of times. A whole bunch of times they complained. And it wasn't a good story every time they complained. Something else always happened. They got afflicted by this or by that. It wasn't good. God doesn't like complainers. God doesn't like when people protest against him. God likes when people protest for him. Very interesting. God doesn't like when people protest against him. Meaning, it's not like God's bothered. Oh, come on, be on the. You gotta toot the party line. That's not God's issue. God's issue just is we know that something that's godly is good, and something that's anti-godly is negative. So when we're complaining, we're anti-goodness. It's not a good thing. So God doesn't like it. We're on the wrong page. We're just not aligned. But when we protest to God, we want more. We want to have the opportunity to be dedicated to responsibility. That's a tremendous thing in the eyes of Hashem. So we complain hundreds of tens of times in the Torah. God does not like those protests. But the protests, when we protest to Hashem that we want more, is so dear to God that when we didn't protest when we should have protested to have the Paschal Lamb every year, that was a shameful story for the Jewish people. We had to hide the story in chapter 9. We had to push it up to chapter 9, even though it took things out of a context. And this is sort of what I tried. I tried to impress. I've said this in shul a number of times, simply for survival purposes, but I also believe in it. And that is that I say, don't bring me problems. You see a problem, don't bring me problems. Anyone can observe a problem. It's very easy to point at the problems. It's very easy to see flaws in other people. And I can protest your flaws from today until tomorrow. It takes no skill whatsoever. Every nudnik and dodo does that, right? You know that person that always points out to you, this, right? You see them and you already know, they just found something else, right? What I said, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. When you see a problem, it's really a problem if you're working on a solution. It's not really a problem if you're not working on the solution. Clearly, it doesn't bother you that much. So what Hashem wants is solutions, that the Jews come and say, God, we want a Paschal Lamb. Problems, anyone can come up with problems. So someone says, look, there's a problem. I see a problem, but I don't know what to do about it. Fair enough. And that can be the case. And depending on the level of the problem, sometimes we feel that the problem is beyond us. It's greater than us, and it's not my problem. It is a problem, right? That's fair enough. So then we speak to people to find out what we can do that's productive. A productive response that creates responsibility, that doesn't create victimhood. Why? Because victimhood makes people small. And responsibility makes people big. And there is nothing more violating to a human being. And there is nothing more violating that you or I can do to a fellow human being than to strip them of the ability to actualize who God made them to be. If we wanted to know what is the most cruel thing that dictators have done to people, in a certain respect, more than the fact that they murdered people's lives, even more than that, in a certain respect, is that they stripped them of the ability to express their soul. They stripped them of the ability to live the life that was endowed within them, that they were made to be tiny little people living in a box, controlled, instead of blossoming people that can share the infinite energy that's invested into every single soul. And that's why when we strengthen victimhood, we are destroying humanity. That is actually what we're doing. When we hold people accountable, the biggest compliment you can get from someone is if they hold you accountable. That means they hold you up to a standard. You're capable. We expect something of you. You are able to do this. Accountability is a tremendous thing. And accountability means responsibility. And what God wants to see from us is us protesting to God that we want more accountability. And that's what the story of the Jews complaining in the desert demonstrate to us. The story of them complaining and the story of them not complaining more. God said, I love the fact that you complain. Where do we find that the macho leader, when you come to a macho person is a person whose strength comes from arrogance, not from humility, which is a weak form of strength, and inherent, profound, eternal strength comes from humility. But when someone has arrogant strength, they're macho. I have to show people how bold I am and how strong I am. When people are macho, they don't respond. You complain to me, or you want something from me. What do you know better than me? So imagine the Jews coming to God and telling God, it's not fair. We also want to bring the Pesach offering. And Hashem embraces it. He says, I love this. Absolutely. And we're going to make a special holiday because you protested. That's how much Hashem embraced it. There's a holiday that came entirely from the Jewish people. We don't have any other biblical holiday like that, I don't believe. Right? It's rare to find such a story. And that we are ashamed because we didn't protest enough. Because what we're seeking is accountability and responsibility, and because that is the very best thing that we as humans can bring to ourselves and bring to the world. Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. I hope I didn't mislead you with the title.
I think there's a great lesson for all that for society at large.
Yes, absolutely. That is.
And I got the undercurrent of your message loud and clear.
Yes, we like to speak in subtle language. I think it's easier for all of us to digest that way. The most important thing, actually, is not just speaking subtly, but what's significant is that every one of us needs to be examples of this. That's how we actually bring it to the world. We bring it to the world by being examples of it. So that's what we all need to practice doing. And that is the hard thing.